Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Seems that there's quite a lot of love out there for Door Knock, which is cool. Always nice to support the smaller guys at the end of the day. Right, okay, so before we delve into this week's episode of the show, I have something I need to tell you. It's fine, okay, it's nothing serious. It's just basically in 3 weeks' time I will be embarking upon the odyssey of redecorating the study here. Now, if you've actually seen the state of this bloody place, you'd probably go, yep, that's a hell of a job, and it's long overdue. If it was a horse, it would have been sent off to the knacker's yard a long time ago. It's become a bit of a dumping ground. It's got boxes and sample bottles all over the place, and it really is pretty shabby at the end of the day. Bit of a disgrace, it has to be said. So in about 3 weeks' time I shall be stripping it out, redecorating. This little lot behind me, the bookcases are all going as well. They're going to be replaced by a bespoke built-in unit which I have designed, which is going to be really cool. Well, I hope it's going to be really cool. So there's going to be a bit of disruption, so obviously the decorating bit will probably be hopefully not too long, and then I have to wait until that's been put in, and then when that's been put in I can get the new carpets done. So there's going to be a bit of disruption for the next few weeks, shall we say. A few weeks after 3 weeks time, if you follow me. I may well end up having to go old school and do an episode or two in the kitchen, or you never know, I might actually do one in the garden if it's nice enough, you know. Like today, it's really quite pleasant out there. Maybe I should have done today's episode in the garden, but anyway, I'm sat here in the dark while it's nice and sunny outside. God, the things I do for you guys, honestly. Anyway, that's enough of that. So, like I said, in a few weeks' time there will be a little bit of disruption to the normal flow of events, but hopefully that shouldn't last too long. And yeah, it'd be really cool to have a nice, clean, brand spanking new study. So, yep, that will be very cool. Anyway, enough about that. Let's talk about today's episode of the show. As you can see from the title page, another independent bottling company's episode of the show. I always love to do the independent stuff. I've always had a real soft spot for the independent bottling companies for practically as long as I've been involved in the whisky industry. I love the single cask bottlings. I love the ephemera of it. The fact that, you know, they kind of come and go, but then again there's the variation, you know, what are we letting ourselves in for here? So you know, it's always good fun. Always enjoy tasting independent bottlings, because even if it's distilleries that, you know, I'm well versed in, you sometimes get the odd curveball, which is really quite cool. Anyway, so today's episode of the show, I'm looking at a selection of samples from the Single Cask Limited. They kindly sent me a couple of samples, well, 3 samples in actual fact, back in April of last year, would you believe it, and never got round to sort of shoehorning them into an episode of the show. And then they kindly sent me some more samples April this year, in actual fact, a year later. They're not quite, well, not wishing to be disingenuous, but they're sporadic, shall we say, in their sort of getting in touch. Although I have been told that they are taking on more staff, they are going to expand that kind of thing, hopefully get more regular samples out and all that kind of stuff. So if they do, hopefully that will be really cool. But anyway, that all aside, like I said, I've got half a dozen samples in front of me, all cask strength, so I'm not going to go into too much more detail, because I have done episodes of the show on the single cask before, maybe 1 or 2 possibly, I forget. So let's take a look at today's lineup. Right, okay, so we're going to kick off with a 12-year-old Auchentoshan. Now, I haven't seen an independent bottling of Auchentoshan in years. I mean, it's yet another one of those distilleries that used to be pretty much ubiquitous in the lists of independent bottling companies, but now you very rarely see it. So this is a Single Cask Auchentoshan, a single bourbon cask, 700-970, distilled in June of 2010, bottled in 2022, at 12 years of age at 57.7%. That's how I like my Auchentoshan. I mean, I don't want it blasted with sherry. It's a nice, well, supposedly, a nice, delicate, elegant triple distilled lowland, isn't it, at the end of the day? Anyway, moving on to bottling number 2. This is a Mannochmore, again, a single bourbon barrel. This is another thing I like about the single cask. It's I mean, yeah, they do some cask finishing and stuff, but like the traditional, stick it in a bourbon cask, leave it alone, and let's see what comes out at the end. Anyway, so this is bourbon barrel 804460A, distilled in February of 2016, bottled in April of 2024. It's an 8-year-old, and it's 59.1%. Bottling number 3 is yet another bourbon barrel. Oh, goody. So this is a 9-year-old Auchroisk, 61.1%. Oh, the butt is full, I can tell you. I know. So this is a single bourbon barrel 801589A, distilled in January of 2015, bottled in April of this year, like I said, at 61.1%. I'm going to probably have to go and have a lay down after this episode of the show, I think. Next bottling is a Dailuaine. So this is a rye quarter cask. I'm assuming a rye quarter cask finish, cask number 301028. Distilled in February of 2013, bottled in April of this year at 58.9%. Another thing I would like to say about the single cask is they do send generous sized samples, which is very, very cool. So it makes doing an episode of the show very easy. So big thank you to them for the samples. The penultimate one is an Inchgower. This is the first finish, or might be the second finish actually. That might the rye quarter cask probably is a finish. So this is a 11-year-old Inchgower ruby port cask finish, 801594, distilled February of 2013, bottled in April of this year at 60.4%. Whoa, yeah, okay. Finally, something with a bit of age. Hallelujah. That's another thing. There's so much young stuff sloshing around on the market, and even if you do find something, you know, that an independent's bottled that's actually slightly a little bit older than 12, they do tend to be a bit on the pricey side. So this is a 29-year-old Ledaig. Oh yes, we're going back into the bad old days. So this was a single bourbon barrel 249, distilled in March of 1993, bottled in 2022. So as you well know, I have did have quite a low opinion of Ledaig. It was a founder member of the Axis of Evil, and still is as far as I'm concerned, although as I have said on previous episodes of the show, when I've done tasted bottlings of Ledaig, and I also did the comparison episode if you want to check that out, I believe that somewhere between 2007 and 2009 they changed the cut points. They started taking a slightly more narrower cut, and they didn't have quite such a what's the polite way of saying it? Fainty spirit, shall we say? Sulphury mess, cardboardy mess would probably be sort of the unpleasant way of saying it. But anyway, so prior to that, we're talking old school Ledaig. So after sort of 2007, 2009. There was, to me, a big change in the spirit, a lot more cleaner, and I can tell you that the distillate that I've tasted since then, that had been distilled post 2009 certainly, is how I expect and want my Ledaig to be. Unfortunately, I can't say whether the Tobermory, the unpeated spirit, is as clean, because it's basically the distillery bottling is you know, first fill, or I think it's even virgin oak, I think, if memory serves me correct, and it is a real oak monster, and it's pretty difficult to see beyond the wood, it has to be said. But you know, if the Ledaig is anything to go by, then I imagine that they've altered the cut points on the Tobermory as well. So anyway, this is going back to the bad old days, so it could be a bit of fun at the end. Anyway, right, so I think that's enough waffle. Let's kick off with a bit of Auchentoshan. Right, okay, so this is a 12-year-old Auchentoshan. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? That's a lovely nose. It's kind of classic Auchentoshan. It's barleyed, it's soft, it's quite sort of Turkish delight like, a little bit of dry spice, a little bit of vanilla. There's a sort of a tingly edge there from the alcohol. It's got that classic triple distilled rose petally sort of Turkish delight character. It's got some lovely maturity, it's just about right, it's just a lovely whisky at the end of the day, and just goes to show the quality of the spirit that comes off the stills at Auchentoshan. The trouble is, of course, that the distillery bottling, if you ignore the very basic entry level American oak, their 12-year-old is just stamped all over with sherry, which is no real fun in my personal opinion. But anyway, this is a lovely nose. Let's see what the pals are. Bit fuller, bit richer. There's a little bit of oxidised white fruit that's kind of creeping in now. Again, there's that classic sort of rose Turkish delight, bit of honey, citrus, a little masked on the finish. Lovely weight, nice fruitiness. Although Auchentoshan has never been the most sort of like estery of lowlands, it is a kind of classic sort of style in its own right. Good blend. That's going on. I really like that. That's a lovely spirit. It's got lightness, but it's got sort of a nice depth to it as well. Okay, so water has made it a little bit higher toned, a little bit more fruitier. I'm getting sort of, you know, kind of off-sweet banana-y notes. It's a lot more fleshier, less of the rose Turkish delight. Possibly a little less complex, I guess, but still, yeah, still that's a pleasant nose. That's what the parts are now. A little lighter in body now. Dilution has brought out some of the sort of natural oils. It's also brought out a little bit more of the oak. That oak is bittering a little bit on the finish, but it's also again brought out a little bit more sweetness, sweeter citric notes, which is quite pleasant. I think all round that was a lovely bottling, it has to be said. And like I said, it's just, you just don't see it in the independent lists very often these days. So yeah, that was a real treat, I think. Okay, so on to the 8-year-old Mannochmore. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Oh, that's quite nice as well. Quite gristy, young, very citric, white fruits, apple, pear, white licorice, white chocolate. There's a little bit of spey astringency, a little bit of green fruit, a little bit of gooseberry, green apple that's starting to develop, but it's not too austere, it's not too in your face. Touch of straw, some kind of off-sweet honey, not overly sweet, it's sort of not, it's got a, yeah, off-sweet kind of character. Yeah, a little bit of lime. That's a delightful nose, very complex for a 9-year-old, lots of character, a little bit of oak, not a huge amount. Let's do the pass on. A bit fuller, a bit more chunky, a bit more oak coming through, but and the oak is chunky basically, so I'm getting quite a bit of vanilla, but not a huge amount. Again, it's very citric. There's some barley, white fruits, quite masked, but the aftertaste is really quite pleasant. Again, I'm getting that sort of white chocolate, vanilla. There's a little bit of gooseberry, not too much of that astringent spey character. There's a little bit of it, and oh, the palate is tingling away. I mean, that's 59.1%. I mean, oh, you can feel that, I can tell you. But in saying that, it's not. You could drink that. I mean, you know, stupid thing to say, but you know what I mean. I think it's got enough complexity. All right, the finish is a little bit masked. Let's put a little drop of water with it and see what that does to it. Okay, softer, more oak, more vanilla. It feels fuller now. There's less citric character, less grist. It's got a rounder character. It's possibly a little bit less complex, but it's certainly sort of. I'm not getting any of that kind of green Speyside fruit now. Well, bar a very, very little bit, shall we say. I shall pass that now. Softer, reasonable amount of oak. Again, it's taken the edge off the citrus and off the alcohol, obviously. The fruit is a little bit on the bubblegummy side, white fruits, that kind of thing. A good length, softer. Yeah, I mean that's a pleasant whiskey. That's a pleasant Mannochmore. I mean Mannochmore can be a bit sort of overly spey and a little bit sort of too sort of green, shall we say. But I think that's actually pretty damn good. It's got a lovely vibrancy, either with or without water, and I think sort of personally I think I prefer that without, but I don't think you'd be drinking an awful lot of that without a drop of water somehow. Okay, so let's move on to the 9-year-old Auchroisk, or Auchroisk, I think is the actual pronunciation. Anyway, let's see what Auchroisk. Well, it's like spitting, I think. Anyway, let's see what the nose gives. Right, where do I start with this one? Very spey. Lots of that astringent green fruit, green spice, biscuity, barley, almost kind of petrol-y notes. Sort of, you know, it kind of reminds me a little bit of a Riesling. It's a bit of an ungainly nose, it has to be said. It's not an unpleasant nose. It's not particularly complex. There's no real oak character, so it's all spirit. And I don't. Yeah, it's a bit too much of that green spey fruit. As I say, sometimes too much of a good thing and all that kind of stuff. Let's see what the pal's like. Wow, that's astringent. That is tighter than a gnat's chuff, I can tell you. Oh my god. It's not unpleasant. I mean, if you love that kind of intense Speyside green fruit, that austere, astringent green fruit, green apple, gooseberry, that kind of thing, you're going to love it. To me, it's a bit bloody overkill on that respect. There's a little bit of a sweetness there. I get a little bit of oak just to kind of kick off, but not a great deal. And I think that's the part of the problem here, is that I'm not getting enough kind of sweetness to offset that green fruit kind of character. I mean, you can't argue that that does not have typicity, because it has it in absolute spades, and in this instance, bloody well too much of it. Anyway, let's put a little drop of water and see if that does indeed bring out some oak, possibly, fingers crossed. Yeah, not really. I don't think that this particular bourbon barrel was very active, well reused, I think. It's a little bit more floral on the nose. There's actually that sort of pollen heavy floral kind of character, but it's still green, it's still astringent. It's really not floating my boat, it has to be said. Let's see what the pal's like now. Okay, it's a bit softer. It's a little bit more oak, not a great deal again, like on the nose. There's a bit more malt, there's a bit more barley. The green astringency has been mitigated to a certain extent, but it's a little bit simple now. Again, I'm getting that kind of bitter white licorice kind of character on the finish, and I'm not really getting into this particular bottling, it has to be said. It's, like I said, neat. It's kind of OTT on the green fruit spey kind of character. Put a little drop of water with it, and it kind of just doesn't really have a huge amount going on for it. And personally, I just think this has been, I think A, this should have probably been re-racked into a slightly more active cask, and B, just given a bit more time, I think. But anyway, that's me, I think. Okay, so let's move on to the Dailuaine. So rye quarter cask finish, I believe. Anyway, let's see what the nose gives us on this end. Oh, that's a bit weird. How do I describe this? Right, well, it's not unpleasant. It's got that kind of sort of astringent mescal-y kind of character. Pulped white fruit, almost kind of agave. There's a little bit of sweetness from the cask, a little bit of vanilla. Do I get a lot of rye spice? I don't really get a great deal of spice at all, in actual fact. It's got, again, it's got that kind of speyside green fruit coming through in, well, not quite as much as the Auchroisk, but it's certainly there. A little bit of it. Again, I don't get enough sweetness to balance up this slightly austere kind of character, which is unusual for Dailuaine. I normally expect Dailuaine to be slightly fuller, slightly more maltier, and biscuity and that kind of thing, but this is certainly a lot more kind of spey, astringent, sort of hard. Again, I'm not really loving this nose. Let's see what the pal's like. Edgy, barleyed, a little raw. Again, there's that kind of mescal-y kind of pulped fruit thing going on. Masked. Again, green fruit, licorice. It's a bit of a hard one to like, it has to be said. It's interesting. Really quite peppery now on the aftertaste, but again, it's kind of not one that I would really want to kind of come back to. I really don't think that I've got an awful lot. The rye quarter casks haven't really done an awful lot to it, to be honest with you. It's certainly not sort of given it a lot of vanillins. It's certainly not given it a lot of rye spices. If you'd have told me that if you hadn't told me what cask that had been finished in, I would have been none the wiser. I would have just said it was straightforward, you know, either a bourbon barrel or a hoggy or something. Probably a barrel, actually, I would have thought. Okay, so putting a little drop of water has made it more maltier, more like I would expect Dailuaine to be. I mean, Dailuaine is never going to be a sort of like, you know, it's never going to be a sort of like a wow factor malt, it has to be said. It's a good solid whiskey at the end of the day, you know, in that kind of Blair Atholl-y sort of style. I don't want to say blending fodder, but it really is. It kind of has weight and sort of all that kind of stuff, but it doesn't really kind of stand out at the end of the day. And now, putting a little drop of water with it, it has become kind of classically sort of Dailuaine, it has to be said. Anyway, let's see what the pal's like. Pretty much like the nose. It's kind of lost the weird sort of tequila-y sort of mescal-y kind of character. It's more kind of classically sort of Dailuaine now, sort of rounded, rich, quite malty. relatively straightforward. Like I said, I mean, you know, at the end of the day, you know, these. Yeah, if you kind of, like I say, if you kind of go back to sort of a Victorian sort of the Victorian era, you know, distilleries were producing malt for a purpose, and that purpose was for blending. And not every, you know, not every distillery could produce the wow factor malt. You had to have the workhorses that produced the sort of like the base kind of spirit that you built around. And to be bluntly honest with you, you know, that is a very important part of producing a blend at the end of the day. And so you had these distilleries, you know, Linkwood, Dailuaine, so on and so forth, that produce this kind of, and Blair Atholt again to a certain extent, that produce this kind of nice kind of base spirit to sort of just build around. Nothing wrong with that, but of course obviously with a single malt bottling, it then kind of, I wouldn't say shows up its limitations, but it shows up what it actually is. And at the end of the day, that's not particularly exciting. It's kind of, it is what it is. It's a Dailuaine. And like I said, if you put a little drop of water with it, it is more sort of like as you would expect Dailuaine to be, but without, you know, on neat. It's a bit weird, it has to be said. But you know, it's a good expression of the distillery, as they say. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Inchgower. So ruby port cast finish. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Quite a bit of port influence, juicy, off-sweet, sort of red fruits, barley. Actually, the barley is quite astringent. Again, Inchgower is another one of these kind of spays that can be a bit like the Auchroisk, a bit overly kind of green fruit, astringent, that kind of thing. And there is elements of that kind of gooseberry, green apple, a little bit of vanilla, straw. There's a bit of minerality. I mean, it's a well-balanced nose, I will give you that. It's kind of, again, it's that kind of, and yeah, it's not bad. I mean, I think I would prefer this over the Auchroisk, but yeah, no, I mean, the balance is pretty damn good on this, it has to be said. You can't argue with that. I'm getting distillery character, I'm getting cask character. Okay, you know, that ticks those kind of boxes. There's a bit of, I wouldn't quite say rawness there, but I mean, obviously being 60-odd%, that you're going to get a bit of alcohol, and you are indeed getting some of that. Let's see what the power's like. That's pretty masked, it has to be said, but it's not astringent. It just practically almost stops. The alcohol just goes, yeah, nothing else is happening now. It's a little bit more cask orientated on the palate. It's more about the ruby port, the red fruits, the straw, earth. There's a bit of malt, a little bit of green fruit, but really, like I said, once you kind of get into the mid palate, it just literally just stops. That alcohol just basically kind of kicks in, and not an awful lot else kind of happens. So we're going to put a little drop of water with it and see what that does to it. Okay, so it's got a little softer. It's still quite porty. It's very similar to what it was when it was neat. It's still quite balanced. I like the nose, although it's not sort of a whiskey I would kind of really kind of warm to, but I have to say the balance is pretty good. Let's see what the parts are now. Okay, so putting a little bit of water with it has kind of given the palate a little bit more definition. It's essentially the same as it was neat. It kind of kicks off with the port, and the distillery kind of character is coming through on the finish, but it's kind of, there is a finish now. You know, it does kind of have that sort of maltiness, a little bit of green fruit, a little bit of straw, kind of coming back on the aftertaste. So a little bit of that kind of porty red fruit. It's basically lengthened it. It's given it more definition. It's still not a whiskey that I'm going to say that I really love, but you know, it's well balanced. It's got distillery character. It's got cask character. So with regards to that, from a technical angle, works really nicely. Right, okay, so on to the final whiskey of the afternoon, which is below 60%, thank God for that. So yeah, 44%, I should hope so, at 29 years of age. Anyway, let's see what the Ledaig gives us. Okay, that is quite a nice nose. You know, you can hear the angels behind me going, hallelujah. I think the thing is, it's a nice nose because there's a lot of mature oak. It's very sawdusty. Lots of old American oak. There's a bit of astringent green fruit, a little bit of bark, a little bit of soft peach smoke, touch of moss, a little bit of fruit, mature. It's a lovely nose at the end of the day. And I think the thing is, with old school Ledaig, Tobermory, whatever, you just give it enough time in the cask to remove the sulphur notes, and you end up with actually something that's really quite pleasant. Now, don't ask me how much this would retail for, because I would hate to say, but it doesn't quite have the sort of barbecue-y kind of barbecue meaty kind of character that I associate with Ledaig. But then this is 29 years old, you know, so it's got a beautiful maturity to it. Lots of that sawdusty American oak, and that just does it for me. It has to be said. Don't really care what the hell it's from, where it's from. You give me lots of that mature kind of dusty, sawdusty American oak, and I'm going, oh yes, I like this. And you know what? I like this. This is lovely. Absolutely gorgeous. Ledaig, gorgeous. They're not exactly words that we normally use in the same sentence. Anyway, let's see what the pass on. Full, malty, a little bit more. Actually, I'm getting some salt kind of coming through. We don't really get that on the nose. There is an element of barbecued meat there, but again, we're in that kind of old, dusty, sawdusty American oak character. It's a little bit of green fruit. There's a bit of mushroom, a bit of earth, a bit of loam, some gentle peat smoke, and a little bit of an astringency. There's maybe just a smidge of sulphur, just green fruit, sulphury green fruit, just kind of coming through on the aftertaste. Grilled nuts. I'm getting carried away here. I mean, that's a lovely spirit. I mean, it has just spent long enough in the cask to be wonderfully mature. It's lost a lot of its kind of raw, well, it's obviously lost a lot of its rawness. It's lost a lot of its kind of, you know, sulphur. And it's just kind of come out the other end. And this is obviously the thing with old school Ledaig. It just needed 20 odd years in a cask before it was kind of really very good. And yeah, that's damn good, it has to be said. And it's going to be interesting to see how kind of, well, I mean, you know, if we assume that sort of, you know, that they did indeed sort of change the spirit cut points at, you know, say 2008 for example, you know, it's not that far away from 20 odd years, you know, well, that's going to be 4 years away. So, you know, it's going to be kind of interesting to see. And I have kind of come across a few Ledaigs post sort of, you know, 2009 distillation, and they have that lovely kind of barbecue meat kind of character, and it'll be interesting to see, you know, how that develops with a bit more age. But kind of coming back to this bottling in a roundabout kind of way, that's not bad for a Ledaig, it has to be said. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Firstly, a big thank you to Single Cask Ltd for the samples for today's episode of the show. Very much appreciated. I think it's been bookended by two pretty damn good spirits at the end of the day. The Auchentoshan was kind of classic 12-year-old Auchentoshan, American oak. You know, it's kind of, it always amazes me why these distilleries that produce a sort of a light, sort of delicate, elegant spirit just feel the need to sort of like stomp all over it with bloody sherry. You know, that makes absolutely no sense to me. This is how you should bottle your whiskey if you're going to do it in that kind of style. It's just all about the character of the spirit. Yeah, there's a little bit of oak, kind of balanced, just very nice. And to a certain extent, I can say exactly the same about this Mannochmore. Again, it's got distillery character, not too much of that spey kind of character. It's balanced. There's that astringent green fruit. There's some oak, some barley. It's all really well put together. Unfortunately, I can't quite say the same about the Auchroisk because, again, it's kind of like, you know, you can't argue that it doesn't have typicity, Speyside typicity, but there's a little bit too much of it and there's not enough kind of balance there at the end of the day. The Dailuaine kind of suffers from the same thing. It's kind of, yeah, all right, I put some water with it and it becomes more classically Dailuaine, but it's a bit simple, it's a bit straightforward, it's a bit okay at the end of the day, which is not a bad thing, but it's just not, it's, you know. The Inchgower, kind of, sort of, yeah, okay. It's another one of those kind of question marks. It's like when I taste whiskey and when I've got my buyer's hat on, it will either get a kind of a tick, a cross, or a question mark. And, you know, it's kind of, and this is a question mark. It has to be said. There's some balance there. There's some nice kind of porty fruit, but it's kind of a little bit spiky, a little bit intense, a little bit kind of, would I really recommend this? You know, if somebody came in saying, I really want sort of like a great bottle of whiskey for, and I mean, this is not going to be cheap. I mean, it's an 11-year-old, so I'm guessing it's going to hit the shelves at, what, 70 odd quid. You know, do I feel confident in saying that's really worth 70 quid? Would I spend 70 quid on that? And I think at the end of the day, the answer is no, so I kind of have to pass on that. The Leche was lovely. I mean, you know, like I said, how many times do you find coming out of my mouth the words lovely Leche in the same kind of sentence? Not very often. Unfortunately, this is not that they don't have any stock of this left, so it may well be available on some retail sites or whatever. I don't know what the price of it would be. It's not going to be cheap, obviously, but if you're kind of a Leche aficionado, or, you know, then worth picking up, I think, because yeah, that was good casks, and like I said, it's kind of for old school Leche. Like I said, leave it in the cask for long enough and it will develop into something quite pleasant. So anyway, that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I hope you've enjoyed it. Like I said, there'll probably be a couple more weeks of normal service, and then obviously things might go a little bit astray once I start sort of wielding the paintbrush, as they say. But until then, all that's left to say is good afternoon and good dramming.